Welcome to Bite-Size English Tutorials. In this tutorial we are going to look at 3 ways of giving advice. So let's look at the first way. The first one is to use should or debería. Now, what would you say to a friend who is addicted to social networking? Looking at the picture, what comes to your mind? Well, perhaps you can say something like, you should do some outdoor activities. Now let's move to the negative form, shouldn't. Now what if one of your friends is addicted to smoking? Now what advice would you give him? Well, you can say something like this. You shouldn't hang out with those who smoke. You shouldn't hang out with those who smoke. And hang out in Spanish means pasar el rato. So let's move to a common mistake many students make with should. So here's the tip. Don't use to after should. I'll repeat that. Don't use to after should. So look at the example. You should to do more outdoor activities. Well, as you can see, there is a scary face, a horrifying face next to it. So that indicates that this sentence is wrong. And the common error is that many students use to after should. So what would be the correct sentence? Well, the correct one would be, you should do more outdoor activities. You should do more outdoor activities. The second way is to use ought to, which in Spanish again is debería. So let's look at this situation. Your friend is addicted to pizzas. He absolutely loves them and he eats them so many times in a week. Now what advice would you give him? Well, looking at the picture here, that of a healthy diet, you can say something like this. You ought to change your diet. You ought to change your diet. That would be a good piece of advice. Now let's look at the negative form. Use ought not to. Ought not to. So again, here's a scenario. A friend of yours loves gaming. He has one of those video consoles, the latest ones, and he spends countless hours on gaming. Now what advice can you give him? Again, looking at the pictures here, you can say something like this. You ought not to waste so much time on games. You ought not to waste so much time on games. And waste in Spanish means perder. So perder tiempo. So that would be a good way of giving advice. And our third way is to use if I were you. In Spanish, si yo fuera tú. So sometimes it's very important to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and to just feel what they're going through. Yeah. So going back to the same scenario, that of your friend spending countless hours on his video console. Now what could you say to him? What advice would you give? Looking at the picture that comes up on our screen, we can say something like this. If I were you, I would do some outdoor activities. If I were you, I would do some outdoor activities. Now moving on to the next part, here's a tip. After would, use the verb without to. Now without in Spanish is sin. So here's a sentence. If I were you, I would to go swimming. Now this is a common error many students make. Notice there is a scary, horrifying face there. What's the common error? Well, they use to after would. So what would be the correct way of saying it? Here it is. If I were you, I would go swimming. Notice after would, we don't need to use to. So we've looked at 3 ways of giving advice. Firstly, we looked at should and the negative form shouldn't. Secondly, we looked at ought to and the negative form ought not to. And thirdly, we looked at the formula if I were you, I would. Now if you want to use that in the negative form, it would be if I were you, I wouldn't. So now let's put your grammar, your language into practice, because the aim of the tutorial is to help you use your English straight away. So here are some scenarios. Firstly, give advice to protect against diseases. Secondly, to give advice to those feeling lonely. And thirdly, give advice to those working from home. Feel free to use the comment section below to write your sentences. It would be my pleasure to go through them. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like and share it with others who would also like to improve their English. And don't forget to subscribe. Until the next episode on Bite Size English Tutorials.